What I did Tashi, it took like 30 seconds to go live or so. Let's see how long it takes for the notification to go out. What are you
All
seeing on
right.
your screen?
I'm seeing connecting on my
Yeah,
screen.
yeah, that's what I'm seeing. Okay. Um, I
Is
know
this a
it's a
different office?
no, it's just I have the camera at a different angle.
I figured.
Um,
Okay.
so and I just cleaned it up for the video background since it might actually be public.
There we go. Always a good idea.
Yeah. Okay. Where? So this is yeah. This is interesting. This took. Okay, we got people joining, so the notification went out.
We're live. All
We are
right.
live. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. People are just filing in right now, and this is our first Sharp China Substack live discussion.
A Substack Live experiment.
I
Here we
have my
go.
co-host Andrew Sharp, and I guess I should start with hello, right, to copy
Hello.
Andrew. But thanks everyone for joining. Seriously, we have, I think, an interesting discussion. Obviously, we want to have a quick chat about what's going on with TikTok and this Supreme Court decision today. We've been talking about this a lot over the last few months. It helps that Andrew is actually a lawyer, no longer practicing,
Correct.
but will help with the analysis. And so, just to catch everyone up, the Supreme Court today declined to issue any sort of a stay or an injunction, and actually decided unanimously that the law that affects TikTok should be upheld.
Indeed.
And it goes into effect January 19th. And the even though the Biden administration has said they won't enforce it, puts TikTok in a difficult position, and TikTok's partners like Google, Apple, AWS, probably Oracle, who face massive fines even for supporting the app for one day potentially.
And here we go. Let's see what happens. I feel validated by the Supreme Court's decision upholding it 9-0. That validates my fuzzy recollections of constitutional law 1 and 2, and again rejects the ACLU lawyers who were telling the New York Times that this was unconstitutional and was going to be overturned. And basically, both the DC Circuit and the Supreme Court deferred to Congress's assessment of TikTok as a national security threat, both because of the data access and because of the potential algorithm concerns, although the courts really focused more on the data. And it's going to be interesting because Congress's assessment of TikTok appears to be evolving in real time as January 19th approaches. And I don't know. I mean, honestly, the reason I wanted to do this is because my brain is scrambled after the last 4 days tracking each update and various reports about what Trump was going to do, what the Biden administration was going to do, what Schumer wants to do with TikTok. What interests you most about what happens next here?
So, well, a couple of things. First, really, I think it's interesting too how, the DC Court of Appeals. It was a three to nothing, 3-0 decision in support of upholding the law from three very experienced and ideologically, politically diverse judges. And then you get to the Supreme Court, and it was 9-0. And again, it's a very broad spectrum of political and ideological diversity on the court. And so I think that actually is it wasn't even close. Basically, it
Right.
is. And so now though you have the Democrats. This law was passed by a massive bipartisan margin in the House and Senate. It had been actually drafted together. Folks on the Hill, like former Representative Gallagher, was drafted with help from Biden's folks on his National Security Council, as well as from his Justice Department. And then of course Biden signed it. So this was the Biden administration was very supportive of this law. The Democrats were very supportive of this law. Now you have basically yesterday, the Democrats are like the dog who caught the car. They're like, oh, now it's going to happen. What do we do? It's going to be awful. We're going to like have people mad at us, and it's going to hurt our politics. And it's like, I mean, you guys passed this law, and then the Biden administration says, oh, we're not going to enforce it. We're going to, the quote today from the from his press
Press
secretary
secretary.
was basically, TikTok should remain available to Americans, but simply under American ownership or other ownership that addresses the national security concerns identified by Congress. Given the sheer fact of timing, this administration recognizes that actions to implement the law simply must fall to the next administration. I mean, it's pretty remarkable when you have a president who says, we're not going to enforce the law that I signed.
It's unbelievable. It undermines the rule of law generally to have any president do this, because Trump had sort of talked about doing this also. But the timing isn't a surprise to the Biden administration either. Like,
No.
and it's really dispiriting to see them approach it this way. And yet it may not matter, because there have been reports that Apple and Google are going to stop hosting the app anyways on Sunday. But yeah, from a Biden administration perspective, I I saw that news because there were reports that they were leaning that direction Thursday night. And it's just so frustrating, you know? Like, it goes back to some of the chip conversations we had, where I think back in December I said one of the things the Biden administration struggles with, they're really good at rhetoric, but when it's time to do something that's hard and potentially unpopular, they tend to sort of beg off and try to split the difference somehow. And
Yeah.
here they're just kicking it to Trump, which you, for a long time, I mean, anytime we've talked about this, have said Biden is going to have an opportunity to kick it to Trump, and it'll be interesting to see how he handles it. Why would he do that? Why would he make it easier for Trump? Because Trump has not wanted to ban TikTok, and I think we both sort of concluded there's no reason he would not enforce the law. But I guess reality has a way of surprising us.
Yeah, I mean, there was some talk that though they're not going to enforce the law because it starts on a Sunday and then it's a holiday on Monday. It's like, oh, really? So laws aren't enforceable on holidays? Great, let's all, I mean, and anyway, and then you
We
see
all have
like
calendars. We all knew when January
yeah.
19th was going to fall
No,
this year.
you see, like Senator Schumer. I mean, it is just remarkable how they seem to really have realized, like, oh, actually, people don't like this, and maybe we're going to be even less popular. So, but it's supposed to be rule of law, and so if this is how you end your administration by basically saying we'll ignore this law, well, then why can't the next president just say I'm not going to enforce all these laws, and then anyone on the other side of the aisle can't actually like fight that because
Right.
this precedent has been set. And so now, though, the question, right, is we had that report a couple days ago in the information that TikTok was preparing to shut down on Sunday, and I assume it'll be 12:01 a.m. Eastern time when the law goes into effect. Um, Basically to comply with the law. The real question, right, is even if the president, Biden says he's not going to enforce it, Trump will say he's not going to enforce it. Even if they say they will, that will the companies like Apple, Google, Oracle, Amazon, will they say, is that enough of a guarantee for them to risk the potential billions of dollars in fines that are
Hmm.
written into the law? Or will they say, and I think there are two different pieces, right? Apple, Google will say we won't put you in the App Store, we'll take you out of the App Store, means you don't get updated, but it still works.
Right.
AWS, Oracle say we're not going to support you. That means the app doesn't work,
Interesting. Yeah. So
right? I
technically
think that's the
speaking,
case.
Oracle complying with the law
Or
is what would kill
AWS,
TikTok. Yeah.
and we don't. I'm not sure. Like on their tech stack, for example, I know they have a big CDN, a content delivery network. So do they have a third party doing that? I mean, it's kind of interesting, and it may be that one of the reasons why TikTok has said we have to shut down is because they understand that some of the companies that they rely on for delivering the actual product are not willing to take this risk.
Yeah,
And
well, and it's a considerable risk. I mean,
yeah,
the number that's been thrown out the last several days was $850 billion, and that's an aggregate total of potential fines. But I mean, that will get anybody's attention, Tim Cook,
right.
whoever. And so I think, and Justice Kavanaugh in the oral arguments sort of raised that question with the lawyers for the government, who said Trump could choose not to enforce the ban. And Kavanaugh said, really, they're just going to rely on sort of an oral promise. They may need more than that. And so it certainly looks like those companies are, in fact, going to comply with the law, regardless of what Biden or Trump try to do, at least in these early days here. But beyond that, I don't know. I have no instinct on how exactly this is going to be resolved. Like, I could look at the legal arguments over the last couple months and say, I don't really see how a court is going to overturn this law, whether it was the DC Circuit or the Supreme Court. But now it just seems like there's a lot of powerful people in both parties that are advocating to give TikTok what will now be like a fifth chance
to
potentially
actually
divest.
do a divestiture. I mean, I think at this point, the only chance for it to continue is the actual qualified divestiture.
Hmm.
There's the whole Project Texas thing. I don't think basically the law has been upheld. The law, unless Congress decides to somehow repeal the law, which seems unlikely, especially in the next 90 days, given everything else that's going on. Um, this is the law, and so they have to. Trump. There's some talk that President Trump can trigger this 90-day extension if there's um, a legitimate deal process underway that not just he but Congress also says is legitimate, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I pulled some language on that, and it's interesting because I knew about the 90-day extension provision, and as particularly as the January 19th date approaches, and Trump, continues to bang the drum about saving TikTok. I thought, okay, well, that's an avenue where he could easily grant a 90-day extension and then potentially bless a, air quotes qualified divestiture, but the language on the 90-day extension is pretty serious. From the law, they say, with respect to a foreign adversary controlled application, the president may grant a one time extension of not more than 90 days if the president certifies to Congress that a path to executing a qualified divestiture has been identified, B, evidence of significant progress toward executing such qualified divestiture has been produced with respect to such application, and C, there are in place relevant binding legal agreements to enable execution of such qualified divestiture during the period of such extension. So it like Trump can't say, trust me, they're trying to
Right.
divest. There has to be real
Shows that Shoes
substance
showed up
there.
at my inauguration. They sponsored something, and therefore the deal. And he sat next to Bezos or Musk, and therefore there's a deal underway, right?
Exactly.
Although who actually is it? Like allies in Congress could theoretically just sign off on whatever he sends them, right?
Well, and that's the follow-up question is like, how does Congress hold Trump accountable for what he represents to them as far as the extension is concerned? And would he be able to trigger the 90-day extension a day after TikTok goes dark in the United States? I mean, January 19th may actually be the day that matters, and Trump won't be president at that point.
Right. And so the question too is if the law takes effect, it goes dark, it kicks in on the 19th. I still haven't found a good answer whether or not they can still actually trigger this 90-day deal clause.
Right.
Or in a sort of a one scenario, the service is offline in the US and the TikTok folks say, okay, this is real, and they actually scramble to figure out a way to do some sort of a qualified divestiture.
Hmm.
And and then that has to happen quickly. And as soon as that's completed, it can go back online. I don't know, and I don't know. It's one of those things where I see different people who should know what they're talking about give different answers.
No, exactly, and that's why this little chat is going to be dominated by questions and not any firm
Right.
answers, because it's really all up in the air over the next several days. I am taken aback by some of the support that TikTok has received publicly from people who voted in favor of the bill. I mean, even aside from the Biden White House, this is just unbelievable. But
Yeah.
it's all part of the circus here, I suppose.
Right, and that's the thing is, right, it was obviously it was a politicized process to get the bill passed.
Right.
TikTok had all sorts of opportunities to lobby against it, and their lobbying was unsuccessful. The idea or the hope was, right, once it was signed by the president and gets kicked into the court system, then it would be a not an unpoliticized process, right?
Mhm.
And it would they would get their day in court, it would work through, and they have an answer. And so I think the court process was not politicized, but now we're back to just like this political clown show.
Yeah,
And
well,
and
I
the
mean,
thing is what's so frustrating is more whether or not the fate of the app as an American. It's like, okay, you sort of expected this on the Trump side, right? This is how he rolls, but the sort of lawlessness from the Biden side is just kind of surprising, and the Dems in the Congress.
yeah, well, and I mean, I was thinking about this earlier and I jotted down 3 notes in terms of why I've cared about this issue all along, and so I'll read the list here. 1, as a matter of national security and just general national security principles, it's really irresponsible to allow a hostile foreign government to have control over an information resource that's as influential and as easily manipulated as TikTok is. So that's sort of the baseline concern. Two, I also just personally don't like TikTok very much, and that's part of it. That's not a legal argument or a national
Right.
security argument, but
I'm with
it
you.
its
I,
net impact on US society is pretty clearly
I,
negative as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, we have two teenagers, and we've seen what TikTok. It's forget the ownership question. It's I find it to be a really unfortunately horrible app.
Right, and you could say the same for American social media companies, but I do think TikTok is even worse than American social media companies and more corrosive in a lot of ways. And I'm sure the next generation of social media giants will be even worse than TikTok. It is what it is. But three, the real reason I've been super interested in this all along is it's a relatively low stakes test of the American system and whether US capitalism has the ability to like potentially forego profits and adapt to very serious threats from the PRC that exist on a variety of fronts. And in the case of TikTok, it's not necessarily private profits that we're talking about, but there's been an exceptionally well funded lobbying effort and donor network that has been influencing the political process around TikTok for several years now. And so it's all sort of a reflection of the US system a little bit. And, you know, we're not flunking the test, but it's getting rocky here as January 19th approaches. And it's still an open question as to whether the US is going to have the mettle to actually pass what should be a really simple test in terms of
Yeah.
what we're willing to tolerate in this
So,
country.
so I mean, those are all great points. Trump had a call with Xi Jinping, and Trump said he talked about TikTok. The Chinese readout doesn't mention anything about TikTok, but it is interesting, sort of from a broader U.S.-China relationship framing, where when you look at what was behind the law, the crafting of this bill in Congress, especially when it was coming from like the select committee, it was about sort of China as the foreign adversary, China as this threat, and the China is this big competition where it's like a generational competition, and the Chinese side clearly believes that, and we're not going to argue about does she think that because the U.S. was mean to him, or it's all sort of who's reacting to whom, but it's where the relationship is, and so you wonder from the if you think about it, if, like how does the Chinese leadership see this action? I mean, in some ways, it looks like wow, the U.S. really doesn't actually have the stomach. They don't have the fortitude.
Right.
They can't even shut down an app.
No, exactly. I mean, I would be emboldened by the chaotic process here if I were a party leader in Beijing.
Or any government, because you look at, and again it goes back to the process, right? They TikTok went through the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch, right? It
Hmm.
ran the gamut of how the U.S. system is supposed to work, and yet even after the Supreme Court said law stands, now they can go do their lobbying with the new president. It's really like, and so I think it's also a view into how corruptible and influence how you can influence the U.S. political system from the very top.
Yeah, no, exactly. And if we go back to the outreach to Trump from Jeff Yass, I mean, I think that happened at a time when Trump was under siege on several fronts with various lawfare efforts and was in need of some liquidity. And the relationship there has proven pretty durable. Like I
He,
wasn't sure how serious Trump was about potentially wasting a bunch of political capital on TikTok literally the day he takes office, but he seems pretty serious. I mean, Shoji Chu is going to be on the dais
yeah,
at the inauguration,
no,
which I guess is going to be inside since it's going to be 6 degrees in DC on Monday. But
and in Shoza Chu's statement on TikTok a few hours ago, he specifically talked about sort of how I think the quote was something like there were 60 billion views of Trump's content on
yeah,
TikTok. right? I
And
mean,
maybe that's enough. Maybe it's not about Yas and any donations. I mean, I'm sure it's
it's
that and
I think it's a combination of all
it
sorts of
is.
things,
Yeah.
and so now when you look at, okay, if there has to be a qualified divestiture in it, and it has to at least pass the smell test, although I think the bar is probably lower than probably some people would expect. Who are the potential buyers, right? I mean, you think a Facebook, a YouTube, a Google, that unless the Trump DOJ decides to drop sort of the antitrust efforts against those companies, they're probably out of it. Microsoft, Oracle were rumored to have looked at it before. There are a couple of different groups that might be bidding on it that don't seem to have a lot of technical chops, but can raise the money.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe Musk can merge it with X and it can become like X Talk or Talks X or something. I don't know.
Well, it's funny because in the past, Ben Thompson, my colleague at Stratechery, he would always throw out Walmart and Amazon as potential buyers of TikTok because they can sort of use it as a conversion channel
Right.
and a
And they
funnel.
have the money, they have the capital. They
They
can.
have the capital, and it would make sense. Beyond that, though, I don't think those guys are gonna be willing to try to buy it in a span of 72 hours at this point. Like, all of these talks could have been happening 9 months ago, but it
Right, and it seems like it seems like the ByteDance TikTok people really either were actually thought they could win their legal case, or just understood that an actual divestment was not really an option because they probably won't be able to sell the algorithm.
Mhm.
And what are you buying? Are you buying TikTok US, and then somehow that product has to be separated from the rest of the world? So you're going to have like the Douyin version for the PRC. You'll have TikTok rest of the world for in all the countries where it's not banned, and then you'll have TikTok US where it's just US users. I mean that's a pretty, I think, complicated transaction, both in terms of valuation, but also in sort of technical and user design.
Right. And from a technical standpoint, I think TikTok has repeatedly argued that decoupling TikTok from a lot of the ByteDance operations is really difficult, if not impossible. And so that's part of the case they've been making.
Right.
And it's interesting because, like, if you're ByteDance strategically just fighting this bare knuckles and saying, no, we're absolutely not going to divest, this law is unconstitutional, and putting that foot forward for the last 9 months isn't crazy, and trying to call the US side's bluff. And only now will they potentially think about a divestiture over the next couple months, because they could go dark and be banned, and then they could divest and the law will no longer apply to them. So TikTok US could come back to life at some point. Um, it's not crazy for them to approach it that way. So it's not necessarily evidence that ByteDance has always been sort of a CCP entity and viewed TikTok as an information weapon more than a business. But it remains to be seen in terms of like potential buyers. Musk is really the only person that I could see partnering in this situation, because of all the questions you raised in terms of what you're actually buying in the case of a real divestiture. I don't know that a real divestiture is possible.
Yeah, I mean that would be messy. He could certainly raise the capital. He could certainly find the people with the technical chops to make it work.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter that Twitter is worth a fraction of what it was worth when he bought it. It obviously has other value for him and
Yeah,
for the incoming president. It's going
and
to be
they
really
trust him.
interesting. And Trump, I guess, said today, he's going to said he respects the Supreme Court decision, and he's going to basically make a statement later. I think they are kind of scrambling to figure out what they can do that's actually both feasible, palatable, and credible in terms of a next step to get TikTok to either not shut down or put it back online if it does shut down on the 19th.
Yeah, well, there was a quote. This was Trump to Pamela Brown on CNN. He said, "It ultimately goes up to me, so you're going to see what I'm going to do. Congress has given me Congress has given me the decision, so I'll be making the decision." And then Brown adds, he did not provide further details on what that decision would be, and not clear what that decision could be. Like, honestly, I mean, I guess he could try to grant an extension, but there are real requirements that he'll have to satisfy in order for that extension to
And
take effect.
the congressional dynamic will be interesting because you had, Senator Cotton and Senator Cruz who were, on the Republican side, who come out and basically said the law is the law. Um, but you probably would have a fair number of Democrats who would come out and sort of want to figure out and work with the president to find a way to sort of make it work.
Yeah, I mean, the Dems seem to be saying when we voted for this, we didn't expect it to actually happen.
Dogs who caught the car.
Yeah, like, it's
Sorry,
really,
Tashi, but
it's really, yeah. Apologies to Tashi. It's really, really embarrassing, and the other aspect that I find interesting going forward is actually, I told you my brain was scrambled. I just forgot what I was going to say. Oh no, I was looking here at a question from Blake. Um, I have a question about the algorithm threat. Has there been any evidence that Beijing has already been purposely manipulating the American side's TikTok algorithm, or is it just on the basis of the possible capability threat? Um, my understanding is that it's not clear the extent to which Beijing has been purposely manipulating the American side's TikTok algorithm. Do you have any insight there, Bill?
no, there's been nothing public. I think that has come out either sort of released publicly by, say, even like the select committee in the House, or showed up in the media that actually would sort of show that there was some sort of manipulation. I think at least in the public domain, it's been more theoretical they could, and I think that the theoretical bit is not unreasonable.
Right.
There was, and when they were making the oral arguments, right, there is this classified evidence or classified testimony
There have
that
been sealed portions of both.
the justices and the judges could see, but even TikTok couldn't see.
Mhm.
Right. And so whether or not there is stuff in there, I don't know. And I don't know that that's what, whether that really affected the Supreme Court decision, or they're just more about generally deferring to Congress on national security issues.
Right, and there were sealed portions of the congressional briefings as well,
Right.
and I believe that there have been demonstrations that TikTok elsewhere in the world has been manipulated by Beijing, and whatever has or has not happened in the US is unclear, at least as far as the general public is concerned. I would say that the threat that TikTok could one day be manipulated by party leaders in Beijing is enough of a problem to prompt action, and the data
I
access
mean,
is also its own problem.
look how other social media services algorithms get manipulated by their owners.
No, exactly.
Right. And
I mean,
so,
the change in ownership in
yeah.
Twitter and the change that we've seen on that platform over the last 4 years is enough evidence of how powerful algorithmic
Right.
control
And
is for all these resources.
Right, and then the Supreme Court. I mean, I guess that part of the decision was that this foreign corporations don't have First Amendment right. It wasn't
Hmm.
at all ruling on the First Amendment, or I think they tried to craft it very narrowly, so it's really just about TikTok, right?
Right.
Not really be a precedent for anything else. What is interesting, though, and then we should probably wrap up pretty soon, but is whether or not, this process has been very ugly around TikTok. I was talking to a friend earlier who was sort of making a more of a constructive point, besides sort of how crazy the politics are, which is that, okay, you got the TikTok issue and what really is going to happen, and what the, Biden not enforcing law and Trump, what he's going to figure out. But basically, there is now a framework, there is now a law for banning other types of apps that are foreign adversary controlled, including lots of other Chinese apps going forward.
Hmm.
And some of those apps probably won't have the same kind of political power and political backing that TikTok has. TikTok, ByteDance, seem to be a pretty unique case.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's why it would have been easier to execute all of this in 2020 because TikTok did not yet have this massive following and massive lobbying apparatus to sort of combat some of these efforts. Um, and it's good that the law is written that way. I think it applies strictly to sort of social media platforms and not like a Timu operation or
Yeah,
anything like
they
that.
tried to craft it, I think, pretty narrowly.
Yeah. And I guess we'll see what happens. They don't need to ban Xiao Hong Shu because I think that's probably going to be off limits to Americans sometime in the
Well,
next couple
I think
weeks.
also its appeal is sort of fading away. We will make one correction. Somebody commented on our podcast where we talked about it, and we talked about whether or not it's actually named after the Mao's Little Red Book, and you know, um, I said no, and a lot of other people said no. But this person, I said, well, my wife remembers a podcast from the founder when they were starting out, who specifically said that actually it's a fashion book, but we got the idea from the Mao's Little Red Book. So there you go.
There we
I have not
go.
yet found that podcast. If someone has a link to it, would love to see it. Because that would be pretty interesting. So I gotta say,
I
thank
would
you
love
everyone for
to.
showing up. Tashi's napping got 50 more users than we did. So I don't know what, maybe it's Friday afternoon.
Oh
I'm
boy.
feeling really I think we have to invite him to nap in the corner. Maybe we'll get more listeners. And we got some questions. I will say the interface is a little hard to answer questions when stuff's scrolling by really quickly.
Yeah,
And so I think but let us know if you think this was useful. We will have a recording of it that we'll probably post later over this weekend. But let us know if you want us to do more of these or not. And thank you, Andrew, for your time.
it's great to see you.
I
Absolutely.
know. I gotta say, I just find, leaving aside the whole question of whether or not TikTok should be banned, it's just this whole process has just been so gross. And it's
Yeah.
like actually getting grosser.
Well, it's definitely it's actually funny because you said it was gross when we recorded, which was Tuesday afternoon, and it did in fact get grosser and grosser
Yeah,
with each successive day this week. Because when you said it on Tuesday, I was like, I don't know, it doesn't seem that gross to me. And then it's just gotten more and more dysfunctional as we go.
yeah,
And then on Monday, we're gonna have Show Chu on the dais standing
yeah. Well,
behind
now it's gonna
Trump.
be inside. It's gonna be so cold. So we'll see where he actually gets put. But I guess there's still gonna be like a VIP
There'll be
area.
some sort of dais,
Um,
yeah.
one other, I will say one positive note from a U.S. political system perspective. I will say though there have been two cases. TikTok, one of them, uh, the sentencing of Trump for the hush money payments, where the Supreme Court rejected his pleas to or appeals to rule in his favor.
Mhm.
So potentially, the Supreme Court is sort of setting out a marker and saying we are actually an independent
There's a
branch.
real independence there, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I
So
mean, the Supreme Court could have been a lot more divisive, on the TikTok issue also, and could have tried to kick it down the
yeah.
road a little bit.
I,
Uh,
I was talking to somebody who actually was involved early on, like right around the oral arguments, and one of the things he said they're worried about like the horseshoe effect, where you could have this strange coalition of justices actually ruling in favor of TikTok, and the fact that is both the appeals court and Supreme Court were unanimous, I do think says something though about how well the law was crafted, but also how well the government actually was able to mount pretty convincing arguments.
and also Congress was not unanimous, but
Pretty close.
overwhelmingly in favor of
Yeah.
this legislation, at least until it wasn't. And
Right.
now,
At
I
least until
mean,
actually what's going to happen, and they might get angry calls from people and like, oh my God, do something. How did this happen? Oh my God, who did this?
exactly.
Right.
Well, we'll all find out what happens on Sunday. But
Yes.
this has been fun. Thank you to everybody who's joined. And Bill, go enjoy your Friday afternoon with Tashi. It's
You
going to
too,
be
Andrew.
too
Thanks,
cold for
everybody. Thank
walks in
you,
a couple
Andrew.
days. Yes, sir.
Enjoy your weekend. Cheers.